Have you seen the latest Nottingham Labour leaflet that's been delivered in this Leen Valley by-election? You know, the one claiming that Nottingham Labour is building Nottingham back. Well, don't believe everything you read. And it's part of the reason about why we left the Labour Party and founded the Nottingham People's Alliance, to bring back humanity, honesty and hope back to all of us in Nottingham and beyond. Hello and welcome to another episode of the show of Squawk. My name is Councillor Ankunda Joel Matsiko, and this podcast is being done in my personal capacity, so please do remember that, and it's not in any official capacity such as my role as a Nottingham City Councillor or my day job as an immigration advisor. Now, the Nottingham Labour leaflet that I'm talking about is a typical example of the message, or as they like to call it, the narrative that Nottingham Labour tries to push out to the public. You see, these warm words, these promises, but really behind it are kind of half-truths, attempting to hide the truth of the cuts behind them, or blame the cuts on somebody else. The truth is that the Nottingham People's Alliance did vote against Labour's budget in March of this year, but that was not to stop the delivery of good services to residents, but it was because it included the previous cuts before, such as the infamous 2024 cuts, including cuts on health and social care that are in desperate need of improvement and that many people depend on. Just like how Labour nationally have restricted winter fuel payments to the elderly, even after their forced infamous U-turns and suspensions of their own MPs. And also they've raised employers' national insurance to 15%, which has been quoted by many small businesses as one of the main core reasons why they have either folded, gone bankrupt, or otherwise made many, many workers redundant. You see, we need an economy that moves forward, not backwards. And at the last budget, we at the Nottingham People's Alliance proposed our own legally balanced budget. That's why it was allowed to be voted on. And we did this by an amendment to improve Nottingham services and reinstate what has been lost in the previous years, specifically the cuts announced in 2024, and especially now that we're being told that Nottingham has never been bankrupt and that it actually has a surplus and increased budget. Also, within the leaflet that they've handed out, there are some really major half-truths and omissions. For example, not community protection. Labour severely cut down the numbers of neighbourhood protection and community safety officers. And we at Nottingham People's Alliance wanted to restore those back to previous levels. They refused, so we voted against their continued cuts, especially that to the frontline staff of the council. 2, meals at home. We wanted to reinstate the meals at home service. Labour excluded this, so we voted against their continued cuts of this. I think this might maybe be a fresh one. Libraries. We wanted to retain all libraries within the council's provision. This is the core reason about why I left in April 25. And they excluded us, so we voted against their continued cuts. You see, at Nottingham People's Alliance, we are opposed to cuts, especially those that are not needed. Just listen to this clip of Councillor Michael Edwards confessing that even in years where the council Labour has seen increasing budgets coming to the council, they still made cuts.
Even in the years when the budgets were increasing, we still made cuts to services.
Ask yourself, is this fair? Are you happy that your community centres have either been closed or put under pressure to close? On the 7th of August, we saw Bulwell hand their keys back in. How happy are you as a Leen Valley resident that you don't have easy access to a library locally to you? How happy are you paying more in council tax but for reduced services? You see, we're now close to polling day, with it being tomorrow in Leen Valley, And for this by-election, it's happening tomorrow. Get ready. You can vote between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. And this is not just a routine election. And also, I have heard that there's some people who can't actually make the polling booths because they've been removed and moved further away from them. So this is your opportunity as Leen Valley residents to send a clear message that Nottingham wants better. And you can do this by voting for Parveen Begum of the Nottingham People's Alliance. Separately, I was speaking recently with some guerrilla gardening activists who are doing some great work in Sherwood, planting trees, taking practical action to clear up spaces, Hall Street car park as an example of this, and overall giving their time to improve the area. And that work, really does matter. It's really great that there are people doing that, and just like the appreciation we have for our clean and community champions who volunteer across the board on an almost daily basis. But also remember this by-election matters too, because if we at the Nottingham People's Alliance win this seat, it helps loosen the grip of Nottingham Labour that it's had in the city for far too long. We are the largest opposition they have seen since 1995. So this is your opportunity in Leen Valley to support this history in the making, especially in the run-up to next year's elections, which may be different than before, but there's still going to be elections, still a chance to make your voice heard. And it may even help us in future negotiations to secure more equal and fairer funding across Nottingham, and I include Sherwood within that because I'm a Sherwood councillor. Though I should say one of the things that really frustrates me is when people, including some councillors in Sherwood, have been heard to say loudly and in meetings and to my face that Sherwood is so affluent that it should simply get less of its fair share of council funding. I believe that such views are unfair and that such ill-informed assumptions, though you would think they were informed, do not justify less funding for the ward. For example, the Streets for People funding that we're currently reviewing and seeing what to do next with. We believe at the Nottingham People's Alliance that parks, libraries, community centres, youth provision, neighbourhood safety, especially neighbourhood safety at this moment in time of seeing what's happening in the news, and basic public services should not be turned into some kind of poverty Olympics. What I mean by this is that this idea of making wards compete against each other for the right to be properly funded according to their needs. And also, in terms of funding, it's very reactionary, and we really need to be more forward-looking. You see, Sherwood deserved its library. Leen Valley deserves a library, which is unfortunately closed thanks to Nottingham Labour decisions. And in fact, every part of our city deserves to be treated with dignity. That is why, for example, I found it utterly shocking when, during a conversation, or many conversations I was having at the time about the delays of Sherwood Library, many representations I was making to get that library open, a Labour councillor in the north of Nottingham shouted at me with the words, "Why does Sherwood deserve a library?" Well, I'll tell you something, that question tells you much about the attitude that is holding Nottingham back and has held us back. It's the idea that one community can only gain through the loss of another. It's the idea that if your area is seen as slightly more better off, you should accept worse services, still pay more or the same, and receive your less fair, not receive your fair share. I reject that, you should reject that, and Nottingham People's Alliance definitely rejects that. We should be working for every community in the city, not setting people up against each other. That's not what we're about. Now this week and last week, out on doorstep in Leen Valley, there's one thing, a theme that has actually come up again and again and again. It's something I've already, and you may have heard repeatedly from council workers and other staff and citizens around, and something I've heard since I was elected in 2019. It's about paying conditions and morale, and whether people actually running the city are being respected. See, in my last episode regarding the council and the Leen Valley by-election, I talked a lot about the six-figure salaries that the corporate directors, chief executives and so on. But today I want to talk more about the other end of the spectrum. This is the ordinary council workers, the frontline workers, the people expected to deliver services after years of cuts and pressure and uncertainty, which has led to undoubtedly low morale. You see, when Nottingham City was issued its Section 114 notice, that one was reported as the bankruptcy notice, the message was very, very, very simple. It said that Nottingham had no money, citizens heard it, workers heard it, councillors heard it, but the truth, as far as I see it, is a bit more complicated than that. The findings and financial reporting around Nottingham's financial situation, I don't feel have been properly explained. We have not had a lessons learned review, and people deserve to understand what really happened and what choices were made and why ordinary workers and citizens ended up paying the price. There's some Labour councillors that believe that it's good just to blame the Tories all the time and say, oh, it's their cuts. But in my opinion, from all of this, frontline workers have suffered the most. They were the ones that went through voluntary redundancies. They've seen their bonuses and pay incentives stripped away, something that's been raised with me on the doorstep recently. And morale has dropped badly. Staff frequently told us and how they felt, and we should listen to that. And that there was a culture that has developed, and this is somebody told me on the doorstep literally the last couple of weeks, that this culture of just doing enough of what they felt they were being paid for. And frankly, when people are demoralised and underpaid and constantly told there is no money, that is what happens. It's inevitable. And this has damaged Nottingham in a very, very serious way and in multiple ways, including waste services, housing repairs. How many stories do you have about housing repairs? General maintenance, neighbourhood services delayed or reduced, services across the board. You see, Labour said their policy, since time beyond, said, we want to save workers first. But what many of us saw was very much the opposite. And it felt like frontline workers were being pushed out first, if you put it that way. You see, when we were still Labour councillors, those of us who later formed the Nottingham People's Alliance, we had already been organising hard inside the party to challenge it on a number of issues, move it into the direction of community wealth building. However, this contradiction of warm words but painful consequences for workers, not just difficult decisions but painful consequences for workers and citizens in practice, these moments need to be publicly recalled because they show the difference between what Nottingham Labour says in public and what decisions were made behind closed doors. Just like their latest leaflet presents a whole lot of really positive things that they voted for, however, is misleading in terms of how they are rebuilding Nottingham and what cuts are behind them. You see, when you see and hear about language of protecting services and listening to communities and standing up to working people, it is desperately disappointing that we've seen in practice leisure centres closed, like John Carroll, for example, leisure centre, workers demoralised and services cut back, with Labour councillors pressured beyond all imagination, even threatened. I was personally threatened for standing up. And with this expectation that we'll just keep quiet and accept the line and then go out and defend these poor consequences that hurt the very people that elected us to represent them. So this is not what Nottingham People's Alliance is about, which is why we founded Nottingham People's Alliance. And all in all, I hope you can see why a vote to support us again, to support us for the first time of going for election at the Leen Valley by-election from Nottingham People's Alliance is the right thing to do. See, if you live in Leen Valley and you have a postal ballot, mark that vote for Parveen Begum of the Nottingham People's Alliance. And if you haven't completed your postal vote yet, you can still walk it in to the polling station tomorrow. and they'll still collect it from you and make your vote still count. Oh, and if you are a council tenant, a social housing tenant in Leen Valley, especially with like Nottingham City Homes, which was subject to scandal with the housing revenue account issue, then make sure you vote Nottingham People's Alliance. It's especially in your interests, because Nottingham Labour, I remember, they enthusiastically took away your Christmas bonuses and other incentives that even when the housing revenue surplus, account surplus, was back in full. Councillor Jones, our leader of Nottingham People's Alliance, was outside the Aspie Library last week as well, which is a direct product of life under Labour, that library being closed. So if you want better, then vote Parveen Begum for Nottingham People's Alliance. And Parveen has these strong values and community roots that stand up for local people and beyond that, rather than taking orders and threats from centralised party bosses. As consistently acted upon and stated from day one of our launch in October 2025, and during our time as Labour councillors before that, the Nottingham People's Alliance has been clear on what we stand up for. We stand up for no cuts to council services or jobs. We stand up for better housing, better public services, and pushing for that mindset, that positivity of community wealth building, building that agenda of community wealth building that keeps more money invested locally and therefore to your benefit as citizens of Nottingham and beyond, as we see other people doing that. It's already been done in other places. And throughout all that, climate and social justice, real action, not just words and events on carbon neutrality, and also fighting all forms of prejudice and discrimination, working to shift power back to communities rather than corporate stakeholders that control us in so many different ways. So please like and share this video on all social media channels. Join us as a member of Nottingham People's Alliance or donate via our website to support community-led politics. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Let's work together for a better Nottingham and beyond. Bye for now.